Welcome to Publishing Your First Book, The Press's Perspectives, another public scholarship panel developed by UBC Vancouver's Public Humanities Hub. I'm Mary Chapman, the director of the Hub, and I'll be moderating today's panel. We want to begin by acknowledging that the Hub does its work on the traditional unceded ancestral territory of the Musqueam people, land on which we are uninvited guests. We're grateful to be able to do this work here. And because today's panel is virtual, we invite attendees to acknowledge in the chat the territories from which they're joining us today. Today's event, featuring editors from west to east, UBC Press, University of Toronto Press, and McGill-Queens University Press, is the first in a series of 3 about scholarly publishing in the humanities that the Hub is sponsoring this year. So before we get started, I'd like to tell you about the other 2. On Thursday, January 19th at lunchtime, the Hub is co-hosting with the Faculty of Arts, Publishing Your First Book, a seminar for pre-tenure faculty, the author's perspectives. So this will be an informal session designed primarily for arts faculty preparing to publish their first monograph. Our panelists will include experienced humanities faculty authors, Chris Lee from English and ACAM, Chris Ray from Asian Studies, and Heidi Tworek from History and the School of Public Policy and Global Affairs. This will be a hybrid event, so you can come in person to Buchanan Tower 225. That's a slightly different location than in some of our publicity, but it'll be in 225. Or you can attend online. We'll pop the link in the chat so you can register. The third event will be a workshop on book proposals led virtually by Executive Editor of Duke University Press, Courtney Berger. That's on Tuesday, February 21st at lunchtime. It's for humanities scholars completing monograph manuscripts who are ready to share a book proposal by early February. And we will select 10 of these to participate in a 2-hour workshop, followed by virtual half-hour one-on-ones with Courtney later in the week. Although the workshop is geared towards people writing their first monograph, it is open to all faculty members doing humanities research at UBC Vancouver. So the deadline to apply for that is January 16th, and we'll pop the link in the chat. We hope you can join us for one or both of these events. Okay, today's panel is intended as an introduction to scholarly monograph publishing, as well as an introduction to 3 key Canadian university presses. So let me introduce them, west to east. James McNevin, Senior Editor, UBC Press. Prior to joining UBC, James worked at McGill-Queens University Press and in textbook and trade publishing. For UBC Press, he's interested in books in communications and media studies, Canadian history, environmental and resource studies, transnational and multicultural studies, urban studies and planning, and health and food studies, and sociology. Mark Thompson is acquisitions editor at University of Toronto Press. He's an English grad. He's also worked at Oxford University Press and at U of T Press. He's interested in manuscripts and literature, book history, film, cultural studies, and communications. Jonathan Crago is editor-in-chief at McGill-Queens University Press. He acquires books in Canadian and Quebec history, art history, architecture, communication studies, film studies, theater and drama, music and musicology, and Canadian and Quebec literature. So I'd love to start by welcoming the 3 of you. Thank you so much for joining this panel. I'm wondering if each of you could start by just telling us a little bit about your particular press. So James, do you want to start? What makes UBC Press tick? Tell us about it.
Yeah, well, I guess in a way, we're kind of the odd ones out in this panel, because we actually, our primary focus is really more in the social sciences than the humanities, but that doesn't mean I shouldn't be here. We do publish a lot in history. Canadian history is a core part of our list. And we also have a sort of humanities presence more through kind of interdisciplinary subject areas that we publish in. So not so much discipline based, but areas like Indigenous studies, where we've published a lot of stuff on First Nations art or folklore, or also we have a disability studies series where we've published stuff on disability art and culture. Even through one of my areas is environmental studies. So we've sort of edged into environmental humanities a bit there. So our engagement with the humanities, aside from history, which is a core part of our list, our engagement with the humanities is less kind of discipline based and more through these like interdisciplinary subject areas on our list. So that's kind of I guess.
Yeah, wonderful. We have lots of people interested in those kinds of approaches. So thank you. How about you, Mark? U of T, what makes it?
Sure. Well, University of Toronto Press was founded in 1901, and we're one of the largest university presses in North America. Each year, we publish approximately 180 new scholarly course and general interest books. We publish broadly in the social sciences, humanities, and business. Our primary market is academic, so scholars, university libraries, students, and the educated reader. On the humanities side of things, we have a really strong presence in literary studies, medieval and Renaissance studies, and Canadian and non-Canadian history. And we regularly attend conferences that are related to those disciplines. As Mary mentioned, my own interests are in literature and cultural studies, and some of the series I've developed or work on include Italian studies, Hispanic studies, and book history.
Thank you. I think we have, I'm just going to do a shout out for a recent humanities book from U of T Press by a UBC author, Anna Casas. Yay. Thank you. And Jonathan, tell us about McGill-Queens Press.
Yeah, mcgill-queens is not as old as U of T. And we're unique in that we have two parent institutions, McGill University here or across the street from here in Montreal, and Queen's University in Kingston. And I guess I would say, Mary, you asked about our humanities commitment. So McGill has long had a broad mandate to publish across the social sciences and humanities, but we do, just to do a quick little show and tell, thinking disciplinarily, we do books in literary criticism, we do in performance studies and drama and theater, we do some neat books like this, we do great books in philosophy, we do books in music and sound studies like these two with very loud covers. We do some good books in cinema, film and cinema studies and media studies. We've got some good books in visual culture and in art history, architecture,
I love the
photography, doing a little show and tell here. Always like to get the opportunity to get some screen time for our authors. Yeah. We do a bunch of very good, as James, I mean, everybody is doing some interesting form of interdisciplinary humanities publishing, because you guys are doing interesting interdisciplinary humanities scholarship. So we do interesting interdisciplinary humanities collections like this, and some interesting and sort of difficult to categorize disciplinarily cool, definite humanities scholar creative books like these ones.
Wonderful.
So that's a bit about us and our books.
So much. Yeah. Well, I know that every press tries to develop some kind of niche, especially in a kind of competitive marketplace. And one of the presses we hoped could join us today, Wilfrid Laurier University Press, Siobhan McAnemy, we were really interested in hearing her talk about developing peer-reviewed podcasts as a kind of publication. But I'm wondering if each of you can tell us about something innovative that your press is doing. And I wanted to start with James. I'd love you to tell our our registrants about UBC Press's Raven Space project, because that seems so innovative.
Yeah, so Raven Space is not it's not something that I work on directly. It's my colleague Darcy Cullen who's been the real driving force behind that. But essentially, what it is it's an online platform for digital publishing in Indigenous studies, Indigenous studies has always been a big part of our list. It's a really central part of our list, and it's you know, kind of a subject area where there's a compelling need for innovative forms of publishing beyond just standard books. You know, there's a need for different ways of disseminating knowledge, and so the Raven Space platform is supposed to allow kind of media-rich publications, so not just text, but also oral components, visual components, kind of non-linear texts. There's all kinds of interesting features on it. And it's designed to be collaborative between, you know, scholars and Indigenous communities. Has a sort of different peer review process that happens to ensure that, you know, that collaborative aspect is there. So the first book that we published in that, or like, it's not really a book, but the first publication that we published in Raven Space was a digital version of one of our physical books, as I remember it, which is by a UBC Press author, Paige Rabemon from the history department, in collaboration with Elsie Paul. And then there are other books in the works as well. And so it allows for really kind of innovative, media-rich publishing. And it's specifically devoted to Indigenous studies. But I think, you know, part of the idea is that with the work we're doing there and the lessons that we're learning there, it will inform kind of multimedia publishing across the rest of our list in due course as that becomes more normalized. And it was we were able to launch this because of some very generous funding from the Mellon Foundation, who had a funding program for this kind of thing, and so it would have been impossible without that funding from them. So we're very grateful for that, and it's just a really great opportunity to experiment and yeah, test the waters of multimedia publishing and digital publishing.
Fabulous, thank you. Well, speaking of digital publishing, and Jonathan and I have been doing this show and tell, but mass capture, one of the things that the author Lily Cho commended McGill-Queens about was that they were willing to make this otherwise potentially very expensive, heavy, image-rich book available in open access. So I wondered, Jonathan, if you could tell us a little bit about McGill-Queens' commitment to open access.
Yeah, sure. This was our first open access book. This is, I don't know if it's that heavy, but it is very image rich.
Kind of heavy.
It's not that expensive, but if you don't want to pay for it and you do want to read it, you can go to your university library, which will have a digital copy, or you can read it on a link that we provided on our website, which has it in a readable open access digital form on the internet. We used a Canadian company that houses this stuff, so it's not just open access as a PDF, but as a sort of flowable, readable interface in that way. This was something that was important to Lily, and that I think in some ways has its origins in ideas about the CI9 documents and the photographs in them that are really at the heart of the book. But when this is a significant priority for the author to publish in open access, I think this is a thing that most presses can do, including presses like our own that do not have a institutional mandate or support to be just an open access publisher, but it's all part of the larger, rich and complicated way that we disseminate scholarship. And in that case was using, I think, a book that in and of itself is plenty innovative,
Mhm,
but
mhm.
doing something that is innovative for some, straightforward for others, but different in the sense that you can read the book without having to pay for it or having to use a copy that somebody has paid for. Yeah, I was just going to say, it's in that in and of itself is innovative, but most presses and most of the interesting scholarship that presses are publishing, maybe Wilfrid Laurier's peer review thing is pretty far from the norm, but in some senses is just a reflection of useful innovation that is already happening in the scholarly realm, and we're trying to adapt that and make that interesting, being the best of what good book publishing has to offer to that, and use the sort of tools of university presses, like the sine qua non of university press publishing, which is peer review. Just the fact that they're able to peer review long form journalism is just another sign of exactly how adaptable peer review is. But that's the basis of what we do. And yeah, an innovative book because of the open access, but an innovative book because of
Yes.
Lily's really cool find and interesting things that she did with that material also.
Thank you. All right, well, U of T, I'm really interested in this But I Live volume for a number of reasons. Although the people who put this together aren't at UBC, UBC is part of a Shirk Partnership grant now going forward that will extend the logic of this innovative combination of survivor testimony and artistic recreation of memoir, but it seems an unusual kind of book for a university press to get behind. So I wondered if you could tell us, Mark, about how you came to that project.
Yeah, that's actually my colleague's project. So I didn't work on that. But in terms of innovation, I do think that we are innovative in the sense that we just publish such a wide range of books. So it's monographs, edited collections, critical editions, reprints of classic works, textbooks, and graphic novels, like the one you just displayed. We also have several imprints, and But I Live is part of our new Jewish Press imprint, which is focused on books on Jewish culture and that are aimed at more of a generalist audience. So even though we are an academic press and that's our primary mandate, we are sort of trying to step out of our comfort zone and work on things like graphic novels and develop more trade titles as well. On the marketing side, we've been pretty intentional about building up our digital marketing capabilities and moving into social media promotion and advertising through sites like Amazon and Instagram, and posting book trailers to YouTube. We're also kind of unique in the sense that we sell very clearly into trade, academic libraries, and higher education. And so I think that makes us a little unique as well.
Yeah, thank you. All right, well, the main question that everybody is here for, they posted it on their registration page as a question they wanted asked. Main question is, tell us about the whole process of revising a dissertation, or what is different? How does a monograph differ from a dissertation, and how does one revise a dissertation in order to publish it? Now, I think we've got 3 different parts of the question being answered by our speakers today. So James is going to start by just thinking about that whole idea. Like, does a dissertation turn into a monograph? Does it need to? James.
Was I starting or was Mark starting? I guess I can start.
Oh,
I guess that is kind of conceptually the first question, isn't it? Yeah.
And then we'll go to audience. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess that is the biggest, most fundamental question is to ask yourself is whether your dissertation really is best served by being a book or needs to be a book. I think people often just assume, the dissertation is approximately the size of a book. It should be a book, but it's not always the case. I think in some cases, if the chapters can be read independently, there's no strong kind of arc or connective thread, you might be better served by publishing them as articles, separate articles, rather than a book. it's not one is better or worse than the other. It's really a question of like what is best for your project, and also what is best for your career trajectory as well. It depends also by discipline. I know more so in the social science disciplines that I work in. Often articles are what counts more so than books for tenure and promotion. But even in the humanities, like in philosophy, it's often more article based than book based. So that's an important consideration, is what is going to serve your career goals best, but also what's going to serve your specific project best. Is it a book, or is it a series of articles? And so I think that's an important question to ask, rather than just embarking on what might seem like the path of least resistance, which is taking this book-sized thing and turning it into a book. And I guess to help with that question, there are some really helpful resources out there. Books that I think Jonathan is going to talk about in more detail later, but books like From Dissertation to Book and The Thesis on the Book, really scintillating titles, but they are, Jonathan's got it there. They are really helpful resources that help you think through kind of some of those big picture questions, as well as like the nitty gritty questions about what's involved in turning a dissertation into a book.
Thanks. Now, Mark, you were going to talk a little bit about audience.
Yeah, so I think a big difference between a dissertation and a book is one of audience. For your dissertation, you're writing for your supervisor and your committee members. You're trying to prove that you're an expert and that you've read everything that you should for a small group of people who are also already experts in your field. But a book's audience is much bigger. So you might still be writing for scholars, but your audience might also include graduate students, undergraduate students, and interested general readers who don't necessarily have the same kind of knowledge. I think a book should tell more of a story. It should be heavy on your own voice rather than voices of other scholars. And so getting rid of endless literature reviews, citations, and jargon is really important. But yeah, I think Jonathan's going to talk a little bit more about the technical aspects.
Jonathan.
Yeah, sure. So I have a few things that I think that are pretty practical. As James and Mark said, I highlighted the question of whether you embark on the dissertation to revision process in order to make a book has a lot to do with audience and who you're writing for, and is not by any means the only thing that you can do. As someone who once said to me, who was a grad student dean, the thesis and your dissertation research is just the first of many great big projects that you're going to embark on over the course of your career. So if you've moved on to another interesting, scintillating one that's taking up your attention in your postdoc, you don't necessarily have to saddle the next couple of years of your life with a dissertation revision. But if you do want to do that, here's a couple of things that are practical things to think about, especially if you haven't gotten to your fence yet. So I always think so many of these big questions that you're trying to have your subject matter speak to are often things that, even though your dissertation committee and your supervisor are really a specialized audience of 5, and you have to decide to write for many more people than a specialized audience of 5, that is such an incredible opportunity to have people professionally obligated to seriously engage with your research and writing. And so, but the defense can also be a very nerve-wracking thing that you will get through and have a fun party afterwards and not remember any of it. So when you're doing your defense, bring a friend and have them write down some of these big sort of balloon questions that are a little bit outside of the scope of the dissertation, that are always being posed, not to answer, not to have you revise to add another chapter to answer them, but really to get an idea of what people are interested in having you say, what are the bigger picture topics that you can connect to, and they want you to make those types of connections, which are maybe not necessarily things that are done in the dissertation, because it's a dissertation and it's fulfilling certain credentialing obligations. The other thing is, after your defense, having somebody record those questions. Those are questions I can guarantee, if they make you nervous during the dissertation and you forget about them, they are also things that will come up when your manuscript is presented as a book to peer reviewers later, because it's all about the plasticity of your subject and trying to make the most with the research that you've done. The other thing is, after you've finished your dissertation, take a good break and get away from it for a while. If this is something you have to impose on yourself, impose it. If it's something that life imposes, as it certainly will, take that for the benefit that it will be, because so many of these dissertations, it's just the nature of the thing. They're written often slowly and then in rapidly increasing speed until you complete them. So that means that the first chapter that you wrote is something that was written a long time ago. And by the same token, it was something that where you did a lot of writing in a short amount of time, and it's very hard to get distance from that unless it's imposed. So get some distance from it, because a big part of it is what you make of your dissertation and the larger research project when you come back to it. And there's also, coming back to it cold has the benefit of having that Jedi mind shift already made, where you understand the stakes of the larger project in a way that you can only understand once you've written your way all the way through it. And you're going to go back and question some things about what you want to do with this. So there's some pretty straightforward. I always like to think about, you take that distance, you go back, and as James says, this looks like a book. It walks like a book. It's got a 5-chapter table of contents like a book, but it's not really a book. So that you have to go back and think about, and the way I like to think about it is, if you come at it fresh again, you can take all those chapters apart, the things that are in your table of contents, you can re-examine them. You want to decide whether you're really satisfied with the way that you wrote that chapter. And you can also take some pressure off and play with the building blocks, take those chapters apart, recombine them in different ways, try to play with that plasticity of your subject and think about what the bigger argument, the bigger stakes of this material are, whether those are really served by the current structure. Was there stuff that you left undone that could be done? Was there stuff that just didn't get done because you had 5 great chapters and that's enough to go to the defense? Go back and pick apart all of those sort of assumptions about what was fine about it now that you have the larger picture of it in mind. But if you have the larger picture of it in mind and you take those, you take those things apart and you put them back together and you get more or less the same kind of thing, there's some very kind of straightforward thinking points about 5 straightforward thinking points about kind of some of the basics of your text and what the dissertation, what you should look at in the dissertation. As Mark already kind of mentioned, is the scholarly apparatus excessive? Are there table and appendices? How have you used footnotes? In what way are those footnotes being used? Are they being used to demonstrate that you have done the appropriate reading, or are they ways that you are really engaging with the scholarship? Are they onerous and too significant a part of that writing? Second, I think this is a big thing in terms of humanities dissertations, especially. How are your transitions between chapters? Are they, how do they build on each other in a sustained way? How do they get at that through line or that central argument that you're weaving your way through with your reader? What is there about the book manuscript that's greater than the sum of its parts, and how do the chapters connect in order to do that? Third, look closely at your introduction and conclusion. Introductions and conclusions are almost always things that are rewritten in terms of, at minimum, you will rewrite your introduction and a conclusion. So the introduction, I like good old William Germano, because in his very dry way, he says, the introduction should be something that at least convinces yourself that you're interested in what you're talking about. So there's usually a certain amount, a little bit of vivaciousness, or it gives you a little bit of the liberty to do more than the carefully constructed, I'm digging out my little corner of the sandbox and shown that nobody else has been active building over here in this little corner of the sandbox, which is the kind of thing that usually sort of is the necessary justificatory apparatus of the dissertation. So introduction, conclusion, is the conclusion doing something more than just summarizing what you've already said? Is it opening up? Is it a useful endpoint? Think about the beginnings and endpoints and don't take those for granted. Think about them again. And last, I would say, does the material require updating or consideration of new sources? Not just stuff that's been published in the meantime, but thinking clearly. Again, the idea of getting a bit of space between this is a question of also getting a little bit of not objectivity. We've moved beyond the rhetoric of objectivity, but a little bit of distance and remove that allows you to be critical about the type of work that you were doing there. Is the scholarship that's going to date in particular ways? Are there things that you could do to bring it further along? Are there new and important, as you're looking again at the way that you're engaging with secondary sources and using those, are there new and important secondary sources that you can use to engage with, and more than I know I need to have this in my bibliography and reference it when I'm referencing it. And that's a useful way also to think about ways to update and make it fresh and current, but also make it timeless. It's not of the moment. The decision to publish a book means that this is something that you should be doing because it's going to kind of be around forever, and you want it to be useful to as many people for the longest possible amount of time, because that's a big commitment that comes, but your publisher is making, but also that you're making to publishing a book that you can't really change for a long period of time. But that's also the great benefit of this type of publishing, is its longevity. And but that's done in service of scholarship that is carefully developed and curate to be of enduring value. So think about your dissertation in those kinds of ways. Yeah.
Super. Thank you. Those are all great observations about the difference and the significance of making that decision to publish. And I'm sure we'll have some other questions from the audience later that go back to some of the things that you said. I wanted to ask a question about approaching a press. So UBC Press's website says, every book we publish begins as a conversation between an acquisitions editor and a prospective author. So I'm just wondering what kind of guidance the three of you could give to prospective authors about how to start that conversation. Is it like dating? How does it work?
It's not nearly as bad as the worst parts of dating.
Okay, it's not. Mark, why don't you start?
Sure. I think the advice I would give first off is to do your research. As you sort of, Mary, as you sort of indicated earlier, university presses have specialties. They have areas in which they have a presence and maybe where they don't. And I find that a lot of the proposals that I end up turning down it's not because they aren't interesting or intellectually sound. It's more that it's just not the right fit for what we do or what I do. So I would recommend that authors start by sort of, looking to see if publishers have series in which their books might fit. Where are scholars whose work you're engaging with? Where are they publishing their work? I think that's where I would start. And sometimes people ask me, is it okay if I just send you an email and that sort of briefly outlines my book project to see if you're interested before I submit a full proposal? And I say absolutely, because I can judge pretty quickly whether or not it will be a fit for us. But generally, the deep conversation would start by receiving a formal proposal.
Great. And I think most of your presses, all of your presses, have some guidelines on what that looks like for your particular press. So I encourage people listening today to check out your sites if they're interested in your particular press. James, what is there anything different about UBC's idea of the conversation?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I would just add like the proposal is kind of the first formal step in the process where we have something, you know, concrete to talk about. But you know, the first contact can often be much earlier than that, even before there's a proposal, especially like at conferences like Congress or other big conferences. You know, we'll meet with authors, and sometimes projects will start with a simple conversation for a project that hasn't even begun. You know, that's just a notional thing at this stage, and we have an initial conversation, and then maybe the proposal comes next year, and the manuscript comes 2 years after that, or something like that. So it's never too early to reach out, especially you know, at conferences where we're there to have those kind of informal conversations. So yeah, there's many different ways that like that first contact happens. It really varies from book to book, but yeah, the proposal is definitely the first official stage in the process for us.
Great. And Jonathan, do you have anything to add to that process?
Not particularly, only to say, to sort of reinforce in slightly different ways. I mean, I think the book proposal as a book proposal is almost always covering all of the same things. That's why it's kind of, in fact, there is a book called The Book Proposal Book that is a guide to writing a good book proposal. As much as these things can really, you know, it's a sort of general rules that you need to apply and kind of adapt to your own project. But it's telling the press everything that's significant about how you're thinking about audience, what the book is about, who it's for, and what scholarly conversations it's sort of engaging in and contributing to. I guess I would also say, yeah, I mean, a series is one of the most direct ways that a press can declare its intention to publish a particular type of scholarship. So if there are series descriptions that you see that reflect where you see yourself, you see your own work reflected in that series description, that's a good sign. But that's not necessarily the only sign. I mean, as I say, that's a direct and structured way that we can, yeah, declare our commitment to that type of area. But there's so much good publishing that happens just because it's good books, and there are long-standing traditions and lists of that type of scholarship and scholars being published by a particular press. But what, like I say, one quick and easy way to do this is to look at your dissertation bibliography and read against the grain and see who's publishing those books that you particularly admire, books that are transformative for your field. Books that look good, that's never a bad thing either, you know. Yeah, it's there's and the good thing about this is university press websites have never had more information about all of our books on them ever, right? So you can look up a couple of different disciplinary fields. We all categorize our book by subject matter in some way, shape, or form. You can look around like that even outside of the pages of your dissertation. It's a good idea not to propose if you can get some information about whether a press definitely doesn't publish in that area that way, so that you know that you're not wasting your time. But I think we say, you know, it's never too early to talk to a publisher if you're thinking about publishing. So you know, most university presses have that type of commitment. As long as you've figured out that this is a book that you think would look good with our other books, and that you can see some connections to your own work, you feel interpolated by it, to use a humanities term, then editors at most presses will always be willing to find out about your work. That's the sort of, almost, I would say that's the funnest part of our job, is talking to people about what they're working on.
Great. Thank you. That sounds very encouraging, to just approach the booth or reach out before the conference, let the editor know you're coming and you'd like to have a 10-minute conversation or whatever. Super. I had a question that I think some of the people registering wanted to know about, which is how much of a monograph can be previously published? Because there'll be a push for people on the job market to publish some chapters of their dissertation. And then they may find themselves with too much of the basis for the future monograph already out there. So what's your estimate of how much can be published in advance? James, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, our rule of thumb is 25%. It's partly like a marketing consideration, just that if too much of the book is out there already, it's very hard to convince people to buy the book. But it's also in many cases a funding consideration as well. Something that we may or may not talk about in this workshop is the Awards to Scholarly Publications program, the ASPP, which provides funding to scholarly books published in Canada, and they don't fund books that are more than 30% previously published. So that's a consideration as well, just a practical consideration. But our rule of thumb is about 25%, and that can be kind of tricky and subjective a little bit to figure out what constitutes previously published. If you've taken sort of part of one article and part of another article and smashed them together and rearranged things and rewritten things, it's, how much of that is previously published is tricky to say sometimes, but general rule of thumb is 25%. So, like if you have one or two chapters that are out there as articles, that's probably about the limit that you would want in a book.
Great. Jonathan, do you concur?
I concur. I would say, in addition to this sort of idea of, like readership consideration, I would say, people know your book already. That's something. But the fundamental mandate of university presses is to publish original scholarship, and your scholarship can be original, but if it's already out there, people are reading it, people are interacting with it, it's shaping the discipline, people are citing it, it's no longer original in that sense. And so yeah, I always think one chapter, even from the get-go in your second or third year, you have a good chapter, or you're working on something that could be a good chapter, not a problem to publish that as a journal article. I think the rethinking the thesis of the book often helps you decide if you know that there's a chapter there that doesn't have a place in your vision of the book. That's a great thing to hive off and go send it off as a journal article. So yeah, James is pretty right about, I would, one, always safe. Two, depends how long your book is. Yeah. two out of five chapters that are two out of five articles that are basically exactly the same chapter as you have in your book. And if you have a 5-chapter book, you're getting tight there, and you have to start thinking about how you would make a justification for that, as 40% of my book is not already published. Yeah.
Mark, we lost you for a bit there, but we're just talking about.
My internet just talking on somewhere more stable, hopefully.
Okay, well, the sound seems good now. We're just talking about what percent of a manuscript could have already been published. So people were suggesting 25%, maybe 30%, because that's the limit that the ASPP program suggests. Did you want to add anything on that?
Yeah, no, I agree. Our cutoff is typically around 25%. Anything more than that, and it sort of feels like the research has already seen its market, and that the book just won't make as big of a splash when it publishes.
Gotcha. All right. Well, speaking of market, I want to ask one final question, and then I want to open it up to the audience. I'm wondering what roles the press and the author play in the marketing of the monograph. So how about you start, Jonathan?
Let's see, I can say, I mean, if you look at the description of the job titles of people in any press marketing department or on press websites about what they do in order to market your book, I mean, marketing department has a lot of responsibilities, which include everything from all of the back end work that goes into making a book visible on Amazon or in other online retailers, to getting a book, making it easy and available for bookstore owners and managers to purchase if they want to stock the book. But I think what most people think about when they think about marketing is they think about marketing and promotion of the book, coverage that the book is getting, how people are finding out about it, where they can find out about it. And I think that this, again, like with many other aspects of publishing, this is a collaborative thing, right? We have certain expertise. A benefit of coming to a press that has published other books that you see even in a very creative neuroplastic way as associated to yours, is that your book is something where we have a track record of doing that kind of stuff. But I would say, so there's some basics about scholarly book marketing. Places like, you want to think about where you think it's legitimate to have your book reviewed, both in terms of scholarly event, like, very good scholarly journals. Beautiful thing about most scholarly journals is they still have a great book review section, unlike even our most prestigious national newspaper. No more book review section. So think seriously about that. Think about ways that you might pitch a story or an op-ed to a place like the Great Place for This, that is mission driven for making scholarship available to a wide audience in a short journalistic form, as The Conversation. You guys can take a look at that. That's super neat. Other ways that you can think about a pitch on a podcast, or in Canada, the gold standard still the Ideas program. I think any scholarly book that anybody would write and publish is potentially a great Ideas program. But think about ways that where you go to look for and find out about books, and then think about ways that we can help you get your book in there. And reviews, reachy and aspirational, but not outlandish media opportunities, and ways that you can bring some shorter form version explanation of the stakes and material of the book and its interest are good things. Most presses will ask you to fill out a detailed marketing questionnaire, and don't shirk that stuff, because that's where the more information that is legitimate, useful information for your book, the more we are guaranteed to be able to do with it. And you'll have that marketing questionnaire relatively early in that process when you're able to think about it. Yeah, but I think the best thing to think about is where have you found out about good books? Where do you go to think about good books? Where do you go to find out about good books? And where do you want to discover new books? Those are all useful things about thinking about where to put your book out in the world.
Thanks, Jonathan. I put in the chat the link to the Conversation Canada, because that's an organization that is kind of a lot of leadership at UBC supports. And I also put in a link to the Public Humanities Hub's toolkit page, because we've got a toolkit on op-ed and commentary writing. And if you go to our resource page or some other parts of the site, you'll find YouTube links as well to events that we've had in the past where we've discussed how you can write an op-ed. So thank you for that. Mark, James, you want to add anything about how marketing works and what the role of the author is versus the press?
Yeah, marketing the book is typically shared, as sort of Jonathan mentioned, between the author and the press. We're very active on social media. I'm sure most scholarly publishers have the same sort of things in place, but we send out email newsletters, submit books for awards and journal reviews. We place ads in journals and some popular media, and we attend events and conferences as well. We also hope that authors will assist in promoting their work through maybe social media, or leveraging their university communications teams and speaking about their work at conferences and events. And I think that those are some really helpful things that authors can do.
Great. James.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add to what Mark and Jonathan said. I'd second everything they said. I guess I would just to reiterate what Mark was saying at the end there about events. I think events can be a really, like in-person events, now that those are happening again, can be a really great way to get your book out there. And so, you know, like a university press does not have the budget to, you know, fly you around the world on a book tour or anything like that. But if you're going to be someplace like a conference, or you're giving a lecture someplace, or you're, you know, you just happen to be somewhere, it's really good to organize an event, and we will work with you to coordinate book sales at that event and to promote the event. And so those kinds of things, you know, launches, public lectures, workshops, conferences are really great opportunities to promote the book in person and sell copies of the book.
Excellent. Thank you. I want to open it up to the audience, and I noticed we have one question in the chat. So Stephanie Glick asks, is it frowned upon to get published by a press that's at the same university that you got your PhD from? What do you think?
I don't think it is from a publisher's perspective. That wouldn't taint my view of the project at all.
I see James not shaking his head. So
from my point of view, completely neutral. I don't think it doesn't make me think better or worse of the project. I think it's really just a question of whether the press is a good fit for your work subject matter.
Jonathan, do you have a...
Yeah, I'd just say not at all. I mean, you know, we're representatives of 3 larger university presses, but any of the university presses are basically a fundamental extension of the research mission of the university. And people often misunderstand university presses as anything from places that will print course packs or places that just publish the scholarship at that university. And obviously we've moved a long way from scholarship only having meaning within the bounds of a single university. So while we really do like to publish our faculty and alumni, you know, it's obvious that we're even just in terms of the authorship of any given press, we're serving much more of a wider wider dissemination mandate for research above and beyond just disseminating the research that is produced at our own universities. And that has to make sense in a lot of other ways that are sensible for you as scholars, or sensible for our readers, above and beyond just we publish McGill or Queens authors. Yeah.
Gotcha. We have a question from Katie. Does the size of an institution that an author is at, or the number of publications they have, inform your decision to publish their book?
Not in and of itself, I don't think. You know, the number of publications in the sense that they may be related or of interest to, or of significance to the project under consideration itself, always interesting. I always think it's sort of interesting to read people's CVs to see how they're building incrementally towards a book or hovering around a book or something like that. I mean, it's always, you know, look, if you're publishing with a good scholarly journal, this is a good chance to have a smaller part of, you know, a smaller chunk of your scholarship evaluated, and you'll learn a lot of good things from the way readers and peer review interact with that, the way you use that information as constructively as possible to make your scholarship better. So those are, I mean, it's certainly, that's good to do, to publish more, but it's not a, you know, we're making the evaluations based on the merits of the project, not on the pedigree of the institution or these other kinds of things. You can't make a really good book a bad book just because you wrote it in one particular place. By no means.
All right, I'm trying to move in the order that questions have been received. So I'm going to go for one more in the chat, and then I see a hand raised. So the one in the chat is from Michael Rahm. Is it useful to outline each chapter's scholarly interventions in the chapter intro?
I mean, I would say the norms around that vary a lot from discipline to discipline. It's really hard to say just in general terms. You know, I would just recommend looking at other books in your discipline, in your subject area, seeing how they handle that. It's hard to give a really specific answer to that question. I don't know if anyone else
Yeah, I
has anything to add
agree.
to that.
Yeah, that's a hard question to answer specifically, but I would say it almost sounds a little dissertation-y to start your project, start each chapter that way. It sounds maybe a tad boring to start that way. So maybe I would avoid that sort of thing.
All right.
I would
Okay,
say
there's a-
that's the type
yeah,
of
Jonathan?
move, just in case you're looking for, if you come
Yeah.
across when you're reading a book like this, from dissertation to book, you come across the word signposting in a pejorative sense, that's what they're talking about. This chapter is going to do this. And then every third or fourth paragraph, you say, I'm now doing this. And then you, at the end of the chapter, you say, I have now done this. You are speaking to an intelligent, engaged readership. The places for outlining in a book, I think, the places for outlining the wider stakes and interventions of the project are the introduction. And it's a bit of an art of the dissertation to book revision to just show that rather than tell it. But you can trust that you have a readership that already has these stakes of the discipline or various interventions that they think are useful or not at front of mind when they're reading what you're doing. And so that's the kind of thing, if you're looking around ideas about signposting, when they talk about it sort of negatively, I would say always disciplinary convention, as James says, but I would say in general, probably not.
Gotcha. Thank you. Okay, we have a question from Ranjan.
Yeah, I think my question was related to Jonathan's answer. So if I haven't finished the dissertation, if I just was about to do the field work and then start writing the dissertation, do you guys have suggestions to maybe how to make the writing of the dissertation more tailored into a book rather than kind of you finish the dissertation and then you were revising it into a book? And also, before I kind of attended workshops about publishing a book, I never had this idea that I'm only writing my dissertation for my committee. I thought, I don't know, I already had an idea that, you know, people who are interested in the topic might be reading about it. So I felt the idea that I only write a dissertation to prove that I can do this to the committee isn't, I felt for me, isn't an efficient way to think about my scholarship and also my time. I felt already we're thinking, well, because I'm writing about tea and tea ceremony, I felt there might be people out there who are genuinely interested in a topic that are not, you know, working within academia. So I was just curious about your suggestions on that. And thanks.
What do you guys think?
Go for it, James or Mark.
It's a hard one. I mean, I would say there's no way around the dissertation to book revision. Like even the most book-like dissertation is still a dissertation. It's still going to need probably some fairly extensive revision. You know, there's no dissertation that's ready to go. I mean, it is just like a kind of a fundamentally different enterprise. You know, the dissertation, you're writing to get through the defense. You're writing to prove that you've read everything that needs to be read. It's a different endeavor than when you're writing for a broader audience. So it is helpful to think about that broader audience from the get-go when you're writing the dissertation, for sure. And I suppose it couldn't hurt to look at even these books like the Germano book that Jonathan keeps holding up, to look at that even sooner, just so you know what you're facing down the road. Like you don't have to wait till you're done the dissertation to look at that book. You could look at that book earlier on, and have a sense of what the process is going to be. but it's just so hard to say. Like I think you could really end up, just burdening yourself with too many things to worry about if you're trying to think about the book before you've even written the dissertation. You could really kind of start second guessing yourself and overcomplicating things. So I would say it's probably best to try and focus on getting through the dissertation process, and then, as Jonathan said in earlier on in the event, kind of take some time off before you think about the book. Take some time to think about these big picture questions, because you may end up with a very different book than what you thought you were going to end up with at the very beginning of the dissertation process. I know that's a very vague, nebulous answer, but it's such an individual process for everybody, and how much revision is involved. It's really hard to answer in concrete terms.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice, James. There are also some practical reasons for substantively revising your dissertation. I'm sure a lot of you already know, but many institutions these days post dissertations online. So if the work hasn't been significantly revised, then it's sort of like, why would anybody buy your book when there's a virtually version available for free? So that's something to think about as well from a publisher's perspective anyway.
Good point. We have several people in the audience who have already published monographs, and they're curious if you have any advice for them about what publishing a book is like for a more senior person, and whether the process with the press differs.
I would say only insofar as we don't expect your proposal to talk about how you've revised the dissertation to get to this wonderful sounding book that you're outlining. I think actually, the second book is such a neat opportunity to take what you've learned about a good initial, like doing good initial scholarship in that first project, and embracing what you're now experiencing as what are the positive things that a monograph and peer review are asking me to do, and then what are the ways that I can get a little bit more freedom from a project that in its initial expression, even though, I mean, saying that you write a dissertation for your committee is a bit shorthand to say those are the people that are going to be reading it carefully. Obviously, you're not doing it to please one or two individual people as individuals. They're there as representatives of the discipline, and to ensure, in part of that credentialing process, that you're doing good original scholarship, not just that you've read a bunch of books. But I would say it's not that much different. Like I say, I'm always interested in these origin points of stuff. So sometimes the second book has its origins in the first new kind of postdoc thing that you did. A lot of times stuff has a little kind of weird connection to something that you found during that dissertation research. And then, you got the first book out, maybe you get a half sabbatical or first full sabbatical coming up, and you really decide to use it that way. I guess I would say, I would say the thing that is the same is you need to find time to research and write, and that's always going to be a fight to find time to research and write. And so I think there's some things that you can learn just in terms of your own rhythms of writerliness, of finding ways to do research, of making sure that you're putting yourself in a position to take advantage of research leaves when you get them, if it's a half sabbatical or a full sabbatical. The real tragedy the last couple of years is people who do archive-based research, or who needed to travel in order to start or get through the next part of a big project, lost that opportunity to do it. So that to me is reinforced. Just this is part of normal life too, even when we're completely free to travel, that you have to be ready to time that research right, and to, over the course of the summer or the semester, or from 5:30 to 6 every morning, or from 10 to 11 o'clock at night every night, find some little bits of writing time. That's what I would say. But fundamentally, the process is the same in terms of you can write a good book proposal about a good book project. The process of choosing the press and engaging with the press about the project and what they see as as important about publishing it, how we want to think about peer review and how that is as aligned and with its eventual audience. All of these things are good things that you're in good stead to understand in an even more rich kind of productive way the second time around.
There's a question in the chat about the general timeline, and I realize we didn't talk about that. So maybe Mark could answer this question. What's the timeline between the receipt of the manuscript to publication?
It's a frustrating answer, but it really depends on the project. A book just published recently that I started working on in 2016. A lot of it depends on the author's schedule. A lot of it depends on the peer review process, which can be very unpredictable. Revisions can be cosmetic, or they can be really, really substantial. So it's tough to say in terms of the review process and the revision process. Once the manuscript is in-house and has been approved by our internal committees, then I would say that it would probably be published within a year from then. But it's hard to say with the review and the writing process. It's a challenge.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. I think most presses will say 11 months, 12 months, all if we're lucky, right? Anyone want to add or clarify anything Mark said? Okay, we've got a couple more questions that we have time for. So Lori Littlejohns was asking about funding in Canada to write a book. So I noticed my colleague Chris Ray contributed a link here to internal funding at UBC that we have for scholarly publication. And I think we've already mentioned ASPP as a fund that can help the press defray the costs of the publication. But are there any other funding sources that people should have on their radar?
Those are two great sources. I mean, everybody in Canadian academia is lucky to have the ASPP because it's a real help for dissemination. This SSHRC money that's just like there's SSHRC money for funding journal programs and journals, there's SSHRC money for funding books, and the ASPP is the program through which that is done. We apply to that program after the book is peer reviewed and accepted for publication. So just think about that down the line. And UBC has a great resource for authors whose book either is being published with an eligible ASPP publisher and does not receive the grant, or I think can be used for being published with a non-Canadian publisher that doesn't receive, that is ineligible for the ASPP. I would just say there's just a couple things to think about in terms of things that your publisher will not pay for. Some publishers don't make indexing the responsibility of the author, and we give a lot of guidance around indexing, but you should be, if you are working, you can look that up early on. Your publisher will tell you whether indexing will be your responsibility or not. That in and of itself is not a significant reason to make a decision about publishing with somebody or not. I often found people that use the authors that put their mind to doing a good index do a way better job of indexing, especially around conceptual issues and detailed things than professional indexers will do. But think if you really are not in a position to do that, your press will not allow you to publish your book without an index. They'll make you find somebody to pay to do that. The other thing to think about too is if you are if you're working in the humanities in a way that require some form of visual content in your book, illustrations and so on. The responsibility for getting good quality reproductions of those illustrations, either during your research process where you're bringing a flatbed scanner that you're hooking up to your laptop and making those scans for your own purposes, but also fundamentally later for other publications, or whether you're paying somebody at that archive in order to digitize stuff, or if there's stuff that's in the public, that's not in the public domain or doesn't fall under the provisions of fair dealing for scholarly purposes, where you have to pay somebody, an artist, contemporary artist, for instance, to reproduce their material, and you think it's important for your book. Those are things to think about ahead of time if you know that your book is going to include illustrations. And by and large, presses are using the resources that we have in order to design and print the book that includes those illustrations, which is not an inconsiderable amount of time and money. But getting them in as good quality as possible so that they can look good in the book is going to be your responsibility. So it's helpful to think about that stuff ahead of time.
Great. I want to wrap up soon, but before we close, I wanted to invite Chris Ray, my colleague who's organized the second in this series of supportive events for book writing, to tell people a little bit more about that. So, Chris.
Thanks so much, Mary. Yes, in January on the 19th, I'm going to be joined by Christopher Lee from English and Heidi Torek from History. We've all published a bunch of books, and we're going to be talking about the especially first book publication process from more of an author's perspective. And one perspective that I would share right now is that acquisitions editors are your best friends. These people.
We know that. We know that. Look at these guys.
Advocates, and really having an editor behind you, like that makes the process a total joy. But we'll be talking from our experience working with a bunch of different presses. I published one book with UBC Press, was very happy with that. And a couple things that I want to mention about the event. One is it's also open to advanced PhD students. So if you have students or if you are a student who wants to attend, if you're looking forward to that first book, please do register. The other thing I wanted to mention is that you have the opportunity to submit questions in advance, and that would definitely help us prepare. So thank you to Mary for organizing this fantastic series. And today's been very interesting and enlightening.
Well, I'll just close by saying thank you so much to our three panelists. You've given you shared your experiences, your insights. I'm sure people in attendance have found your comments really helpful, and we hope they submit something to one of your presses soon. Thank you to everyone who's attended, and we hope to see you at the event Chris is organizing on January 19th. Take care.
Thank you, Mary.